want to welcome William, or Web3 here. Really excited to hear this presentation, hear about your career experience, and then hear what sort of advice you have for our college students who are going to be navigating their own tech careers. So, quick background on William. William spent over 3 years at Google as a software engineer, and recently moved to a startup called Full Story and works as a senior software engineer there. So I'm sure we'll hear a lot more about that transition and how things are going now. But really grateful for you giving up your time, making this presentation, and also sharing your advice. With that, I'll pass it to you, William.
Cool, thank you. All right, so good afternoon, everyone. As I mentioned, I'm William Bailey, software engineer and tech evangelist, and I'll be talking a little bit more about navigating your tech career. So I'm going to use a lot of the experience that I've had in the industry and also during my college years, kind of show kind of one potential path of how that looked like, and then also give some tips and suggestions that I learned along the way. This particular presentation will be broken down to four stages. So I'll start first talking a little bit about myself, personalize the person who's presenting, so to speak. Then I'll dive into my college career. So starting in high school, how I initially got into computer science, talk about college, and then to industry career thus far. And so starting off with Google back in 2016 after I graduated, and then currently have a role at Full Story. And then we'll end with some Q&A where you have an opportunity to ask anything you like. But before I go, I decided to do some prizes for this presentation. So in the theme of webs, I've hidden some spider webs, as you can see right there, throughout the presentation. So if you can count how many there are as we're going through, make sure to keep this to yourself. And then at the end, I'll ask you how many there are. The first person to type in the correct amount into the chat wins a prize. We made a mystery for now. You can only, if no one gets the correct answer, then the person who gets the closest will win. You may only guess once, so do not spam the chat box. And the last thing is the spider web on this slide counts. So technically we're already up to 1. All right. So with that, let's dive right into the presentation. So phase 1, meeting Web3. So I'm from Atlanta, Georgia. I was born and raised there, stayed throughout high school. Then back in 2012, I went off to Yale to do computer science as my undergrad degree. Once I graduated from college, as mentioned, the first job I had was software engineer at Google. I was out in the Mountain View campus, so I got a chance to experience California and the warm, sunny weather out there. I was primarily under search infrastructure, so working on the backend side of the system. I'm currently now a software engineer, a senior software engineer at Full Story. So Full Story is a startup in the digital experience space. So for example, if you had a website and you wanted to learn a little bit more about like users and what they were doing on your site, and if they had errors, it provides session replay capabilities such that you can see that, and then you can also have other quantitative analyses like dashboards and metrics and things of that nature. My night job, so to speak, is tech evangelism. I love kind of interacting with students, and so I've done a lot of things like campus recruiting, diversity-related outreach to kind of just help mentor folks along that space, and it's really one of the passions that I have. Other things, so major childhood events, and these kind of also influenced a lot of kind of different aspects of my career as well. So I was homeschooled for about 8 years or so, and that helped a lot in kind of instilling a lot of aspects of needing to be solving problems independently. I think that helped a lot even to this day in some of the career things that I've done. And then when I was 12, I accepted Jesus as my Lord and Savior, and Christianity has been an important part of my life since then. On the video game side, I love Legend of Zelda and Super Smash Bros. I've been a big fan of Super Smash Bros. Ever since it's started, Young Link being one of my mains. And then fun fact, I've actually held a human brain before. You can ask me afterwards why I was doing that. All right. So with a little bit about myself out the way, let's dive into college career. So for a college career, we'll just jump through 4 major portions. So we'll start off with high school, when I was first introduced with AP Computer Science, CSSI, which is a program that Google sponsors, the Yale CS in my time there, and then internships that I had while I was in school, Google, and then also Capital One. All right, so high school. I actually had very limited exposure to CS initially. So my dad worked in IT and security, and so I was familiar with computers, and so I knew how to type and things of that nature growing up. But I didn't really like the management and configuration side as much, which was more kind of into what my dad was working with. And so growing up, I was more into the humanities sides of things. I actually wanted to go to business school and then, or undergraduate business degree, and then go on to law. And so for the most part, really a technical career path wasn't on my radar. But I needed a fine arts requirement to graduate. And my Christian private school actually considered AP Computer Science as a fine arts. So I was like, okay, well, why not? My dad works with computers, I might as well give it a try. And I decided to take it. And I immediately kind of fell in love with the subject. I love the building aspect. We're almost like you could have like a logic puzzle and you're putting the pieces of code together to construct something that you could actually then show off, that you can show your friends or other people. It's like, hey, this is something that I built, and you can interact with in that regard. And so I enjoyed it a lot. But when I was applying to colleges, I was still primarily pursuing liberal arts schools. Because at the time I was like, okay, I've only had this course for maybe, a semester at most, and I'm not going to just, change my entire career path just because my love of video games may be getting in my way, so to speak. So I ended up getting into Yale and wanted to head there. But that posed somewhat of a problem to my initial plan. Because Yale didn't have an undergraduate business major. If I went there, I couldn't major in business. But I was like, okay, I feel like I've enjoyed computer science enough now that I could potentially do the major there. And given the fact that I had talked with some folks who were in law school and said, hey, you can pretty much do anything and be a lawyer. You could do biology and still become a lawyer. I was thinking, okay, I'll do CS, enjoy it, and then go on to law school, and maybe I might become a patent lawyer. And so that's how I initially shifted from being business, logistic poli-sci to interested in CS. So I guess two key lessons that I would kind of draw from this initial phase. I think first, definitely explore, be curious. I'm very thankful that I had to take that computer science course, because looking back, I'm definitely much happier in computer science than I probably would be being a lawyer right now. And so oftentimes you may unintentionally discover your passion, so to speak. And so being able to try a lot of different things can be useful. Either one, you might find something you really enjoy, or two, since a lot of fields are more interconnected than we may initially think, you may learn valuable skills or ways of approaching problems that may be useful for you in the future. And then I think the other thing is, be flexible with life plans. I think especially for type A folks in the room, it's good to make sure that we have plans and we know where we're going. But oftentimes, the individuals and the road itself may be a lot of twists and turns or things that you might not expect. So there's a degree to which you want to hold your plan somewhat loosely and be willing to adjust and adapt based on kind of on what goes your way, comes your way, so to speak. So with all of that, I was introduced to computer science, but I was still, fairly uncertain about the path of CS. And this is where computer science, this Computer Science Summer Institute came into play. So it's a 3-week program that Google sponsored to teach underrepresented groups in coding how to code. You were taught by Google engineers throughout those 3 weeks. You learned Python and web development. And back during the day, since GitHub wasn't as much of a thing, we actually had to store all of our source files on Dropbox and then collaborate that way. We were put into a team, about 3 or 4 people, and then we had to all work together to build out something and then present it before everyone else. And so that experience really helped to open my eyes even more to computer science. I really enjoyed the building aspect again and seeing just how CS could be applied in the real world, because really you can apply it in a wide range of subjects. If you're interested in health, biotech is a thing, business, the law, etc. The more that you know CS, you can kind of couple it with a lot of your individual interests, and that will kind of set you apart. Not only that, it was my first time actually being able to go to Google and to California. And so it was helpful for me to see like, hey, this is the office space. This is what it looks like, so to speak, if I were to be a software engineer. And so after getting a taste of that free food, I definitely wanted to come back. And then it also just gave me more confidence that I personally could succeed in computer science. And so it gave me more confidence to say like, yes, I think CS is really the major I want. And I could have potentially started CS major later in the sense of like taking courses maybe sophomore year or so. I was like, okay, let's just in freshman year go ahead and get started with computer science. So this led into kind of my time at Yale for CS. So I'll do it this and somewhat some of the sections moving forward slightly differently. Instead of going into the nitty-gritty details of each of the individual things that I've done, I'll kind of give high-level general summaries, and then I'll state individual points that I think would be useful for you all to kind of take away in your individual context. So the first thing that you need to know about our CS department is that it's highly theoretical and highly classical. So there was a great emphasis on algorithms, a lot of theoretical courses, and then also your more traditional CS, so like operating systems, network, distributed systems, things like that. There were actually very few practical courses, which was one of the things that was kind of always a source of tension among students, because if you wanted to go into game design or mobile development, for example, you very rarely could find a class that would fit that. And so a lot of folks end up having to do things on the side. But this trained us very well to think like engineers, which is something that a lot of the big companies look for. Especially in the case of Google, where you could have an engineer who could work on Android or Google Chrome or some of the Google Fiber. You really need somebody who knows how to think well as an engineer, can kind of learn in the individual places in the individual context. And so that set us up very well from the CS perspective. And so the thing I would say take away from this aspect is, learning the fundamentals and history of CS is very important. And I would encourage you to kind of expand your reach in that area. So to give an example, if you're a front-end engineer primarily, and you like working with the UI, learn a little bit about the back end, understand what the constraints are there and how it works. And that will help you such that as you are writing more front-end code, that you can have an ability to say like, hey, this is probably what the backend is doing underneath. And this may be ways in which I might want to structure my API or how I do things to make it easier for the backend. Likewise, if you're a backend engineer, take a memory management or operating system course and understand how memory management works. You're probably never going to actually have to use that in your day-to-day job, but understanding some of the trade-offs that were made there will be useful so that you can know, okay, maybe this pattern of doing things might be more memory intensive than another pattern. Not only that, but a lot of the design patterns that we use in computer science, we reuse them in different contexts. So learning different design approaches in one area will be useful in another. So secondly, take your classes seriously. So this is another thing I noticed during school, that oftentimes students may focus a lot more on the extracurricular activities for experience. And especially for the intro courses, might be mindset like, okay, well, maybe I got a B or so in the course, I'm passing, I'm fine, I'm good. But I would really recommend and encourage going the extra mile, especially on those introduction courses. To use an analogy, you're building a foundation when you're taking those initial courses. And so you want to make sure that your foundation is firm and sturdy so that everything that you build on top of it will be solid as well. But if you kind of have a shaky foundation, then that might pose problems for you when you're trying to build on some of those concepts later on the road. I'd also recommend definitely read the textbook. Don't listen to your friends who will tell you otherwise. A part of, just like if you learn an initial language, how you just need to do repetition after repetition after repetition, and sometimes it can feel tedious. It is useful to continue to have that repetition of textbooks, assignments, teachers, and lectures, such that you really drill in those concepts since they become second nature. So another tip I would say, don't be afraid of some of the tougher courses. So whether that operating systems, networks, compilers, try to get into those, take them, because they can be very good opportunities for you when you are trying to like put projects on your resume. Because as a personal example for myself, I ended up getting 2 potential job opportunities because folks noticed like, hey, you took an operating systems course or you took a database course. So definitely don't underestimate the power of a good media course in being able to help you land a job. And then another assortment of tips. One, I guess New England is definitely much prettier or much more tolerable, I'd say, in the springtime than in the winter. The snow was beautiful, but the cold was brutal. But in any event, onwards, yes, branch out outside of computer science. So I recommend taking English courses and other types of courses. Now I know it's computer science and more math that might make us nervous, but especially as you're growing in your career, the actual technical portions are going to make up a smaller and smaller piece of what you're doing. Because for example, like if you're a tech lead or if you're a manager, you're oftentimes needing to communicate with other teams and say like, hey, this is the part that I'm responsible for, or this is what I need from your team, or this is why this project is actually valuable and meets our bottom line. Or if you're talking with sales or product people, you need to be able to communicate with them in a language that they can understand versus talking in technical speak. And so the better that you can get at communication, the better off you'll be. So definitely don't limit yourself strictly to computer science in school, but branch out. Leverage campus recruiting activities. A lot of companies will come onto the campus and they'll do things like mock interviews, resume reviews, or just coffee chats. We can talk with engineers, take advantage of that. It's definitely helpful to kind of demystify some of these processes so you feel less nervous going into them. And you can also just learn what it's like to be at these different companies and help you chart and navigate your own path. Be balanced, don't do too much. It can be very easy to want to do all the things, but if you do too much, you won't be able to be efficient in the things that you're doing. So to do less, if you do less so that you can actually do more in those areas, that's a good thing. And also too, just to have a time to rest and relax and enjoy being a college student. And then leverage your alumni connections. Talk with upperclassmen even who are there. Ask them what the classes were like. Reach out to alumni to learn more about what the jobs they have are like. So definitely make sure to use that network. And then also, look for ways to apply CS in other departments as well. I ended up taking an animation course, which was nice because I ended up getting to create a video game as my final project, which we didn't necessarily have like a video game course in our CS department, but by being able to take in another department, I was able to leverage that. But then also I had a friend who was working at the art gallery. And so they needed some of their software to be automated. So he was actually writing a program that would help them put in new coins into the system. So he had to interface with a scale that would actually take the weight and then also move a camera to take pictures with that. When I first told me about it, I was thinking, man, that's probably every CS student's dream to have a project like that. And so that's what I'd recommend too. Instead of focusing strictly on the CS department, maybe go to some of the other departments, learn what their problems are, and then see if there's a unique way in which you can provide technology into that. Ooh. So that kind of covers kind of more of college in particular. And so I'll move into my summers. So I had 3 internships during the summer. My first one after freshman year was the Google STEP internship. In 2014, I moved on to the Google Suite internship. And then in 2015, I interned at Capital One. So I'll go through each and then share some of the salient points from them. So first, for the STEP internship, this was my first industry experience. And there's a big difference between coding in school versus coding in the industry. To give you one example, If you are coding for school, typically your project is the span of a couple of weeks, maybe a month at most. But then after that, you never see your code again. Whereas in the industry, if you never saw code that you wrote after a month, you would probably be a failing company. And so you want to make sure that you're writing code that's sustainable for the long term. And so there's just a different mindset that comes in and different types of techniques that you need to know. And so we learn much more about source control, Git, things of that nature, code reviews where you'll have one engineer look over your code and make comments to make sure that's an appropriate design pattern that you're following, appropriate styling, writing tests, which is extremely important because one of the things you do often in industry is refactoring, where you may try to change up how the code is built to be more efficient or to remove an older platform, and having tests that can validate that you don't break anything is extremely important. And then design docs as well, where before you actually get into the coding, you can just take a moment to say, okay, well, what is like, how do I design this? What are the edge cases? Do I take this approach or that approach? And you can really hammer that out before you actually start coding. You do that more in the industry. And so those were a lot of the kind of tools and tips and strategies I learned in the first internship that I had. The second internship, I think the biggest thing was just understanding more of having a holistic approach. So I was working on developing a new feature to some of an unreleased project, and it involved a little bit of front-end work to configure UI and some back-end work as well. And because of the fact that the project was launched at the time, our product manager was focusing a lot on understanding, like, hey, how do we want to brand this? How do we want to style this? And is this something that will actually solve our customers' needs? And so it helped me to take a more holistic approach to my programming. The thing, especially as software engineers, we can focus really a lot on the technology that we love and love it for technology's sake. But it's useful to first take a step back and ask, okay, what are the product use cases? What is it that our customers need? What are we trying to give for them? What's acceptable? What's unacceptable? And that, by able to get your constraints, those are going to feed into all the things that you do throughout the system. Again, knowing the back end and front end, because knowing how those two interrelate will help you, especially if you want to become an architect or like designing larger systems, that while you'll have one specific area that you know well, it's good to kind of know a little bit about what the other systems do, such that when you're designing for them, you can make sure that you get the requirements right appropriately. And then lastly, so I interned in Capital One in Richmond, Virginia, and returned to the South for this internship. And so the points here are, it's good to experience a few companies. Each industry is going to do it slightly different. Tech is going to be slightly different than tech in law or tech in biotech or even just traditional tech companies. So experience a few different things. What one tech company does is they're going to have certain strengths and best practices versus another. And so it's just useful to learn those things, learn the styles that you like better. And it's much easier to do that as a student, where you come in, you spend 3 months in the summer, then you go back to school, versus if you're working, you basically have to find a new job and then quit your old job and then potentially relocate to another city. And so it just adds a little bit more to kind of transition later on in your career. And then also don't be overly swayed by brand names. If you don't happen to work in Apple, Google, Facebook, it's not going to be the end of the world. There's still many companies where you can be happy, or sometimes even happier, working there as well. And so, keep that in mind and know that that's just one equation to a decision that you're making, but it doesn't have to necessarily be the overriding and overruling factor. All right, so I'll talk a little bit, kind of bringing in some of my campus recruiting days, about some useful things for you to have in mind about how to get an internship. So one, to talk about your resumes, I would recommend the format accomplished Y by doing X as measured by Z. And so to give an example of that, you could say, I made the network faster. It's true, but it's kind of vague and it's hard for us to really get a sense of what you did. But if you were to say, I reduced network latency by 5 seconds by implementing the LZW compression algorithm, that's much more specific. We can actually quantify the amount of impact that you had. We know what technologies or tools that you were using. And so it makes for a much more powerful, more compelling case for your resume. Also, make sure to put down that you've done algorithms and data structures. Oftentimes, a lot of the larger companies will be kind of using those as a litmus test because a lot of the interviews themselves are very data structures and algorithms based. And so if they see that you've taken those classes, that's higher confidence that you'll be able to pass the coding interview. And then also use keywords from the job description. So if they require Unreal Engine experience, list explicitly in your resume that you work with Unreal Engine. And especially if you're looking to apply to slightly different job markets, like if you were wanting to apply to the traditional tech, maybe tech and finance and game companies, you may create slightly different resumes that are tailored to each one of these. For the interviews, think out loud. Oftentimes your interviewer is writing notes, not just about the code that you're writing, but also how you got about the solution. So if you pause for a moment, or maybe like 3 minutes, and you're just staring at the whiteboard, your interviewer doesn't know if you're stuck or if you're thinking. And so talking out loud is useful so that you can kind of continue to give them material to write down. Brainstorm your edge cases and solutions before coding. Typically speaking, the problems are given intentionally ambiguous and they don't give you all the details up front, such that you will have to ask and clarify. And interviewers aren't just doing this to try to trick you, but this is also going to be a reflection of what you'll have to do in the industry. Because if when my manager comes to me and says, hey, solve this problem, I'm not necessarily given a list of all the edge cases that I need to be aware of. But part of my job and my responsibility is to kind of go through and figure out these things along the way. And then lastly, don't panic. Oftentimes interviewers can ask problems that are much harder, just kind of get a gauge of what your level is. Are you exceeding or strongly exceeding and things of that nature? And so just do your best, let the chips fall where they may, and continue to press on, even if you don't think you're doing well. Because there have been some interviews where I thought I did well and I ended up not doing as well. And there were some where I thought I did do well and I ended up moving on to the next stage. So just continue to do your best. Other things, have a friend refer you. I probably would say referrals are maybe like 3 to 4 times more likely to get hired than if you just go through the code process. And you're definitely much more likely to get contacted by a recruiter, especially if you're applying for one of the larger tech companies. And then reach out to your alumni network again. If you have alumni who work in that individual company, definitely take advantage of that as well. All right, so that is a little bit about college career. And so I'm going to step now into industry career and talk a little bit about kind of the past 4 years and what I've been up to. So again, 4-part process. So I'll talk about my Xoogler days. So Xoogler, just being a term we'd use at Google, meaning new Googler. TLing and some intern hosting that I did. Some tech evangelism work, and then wrap up with full story and talking a little bit about startup culture. All right, so when I first joined, and kind of over the course of 2 years, I learned quite a number of things about how the industry in general differs from school. And so I'll run it by 6 kind of salient points that kind of stood out to me during that time. So first, when you're in the industry, you're dealing with a greater degree of ambiguity. Because typically, in school, you'd have an assignment. The what you need to do is fairly well specified, and it's just you just need to figure out how to do it. But oftentimes in the industry, you don't necessarily know what the solution is beforehand, and so you oftentimes need to figure out not only how to do it, but what you should actually be doing in the first place. And the higher up the ladder you go, the greater the amount of ambiguity that you're expected to be able to understand and properly disambiguate, so to speak. It also requires greater ownership as well, because you are ultimately in charge of your career. Because, in school, if you want to be a CS major, for the most part, your path is laid out for you. You know which courses you need to take. You need to take a certain amount of electives. But in the industry, there are a lot of different paths. You could be a product manager. You could stay in CS as an individual contributor. You could become a tech lead or a manager. And so those paths are not as carved out as clearly, so to speak. So a lot of this is up to you to communicate with your manager. Hey, this is what I want to do. This is where I want to go. Can you help me move along the way? Third, measuring impact. And so you always, in the business, you always want to make sure you can tie your work back into what the business cares about. And so if you could say like, hey, I built this really cool feature, but no one uses it, then that's not going to be weigh as much in your promotion process or things of that nature than if you were to say, hey, I built this business feature and it drove an additional 500K in annual revenue and things of that nature. Then that can really help to kind of show and demonstrate the value that you're having to the company. On that note, it's important to craft the narrative. And so you want to make sure that you're presenting your work in a way that the company sees as valuable. So definitely as you're going through, keep track of what you're doing and write summaries about your work often, because it's much easier to summarize a project right after you've done it versus waiting 6 months when the performance review comes around and then you have to summarize everything that you've done for the past 6 months. Get a mentor to help you navigate the different roads. I would say, especially if you're in an underrepresented group, I would highly encourage getting a mentor who's a similar different demographic for yourself, just so that your mentor can help you in saying like, hey, what are some specific challenges that you might face, like as a woman in code, as African American, or what have you, in coding, and that can be helpful to kind of navigate those things. And then lastly, analyze things soberly. I feel like part of CS outreach and CS education kind of paints things kind of with rose-colored glasses, like everything is always going to work out. If there's a will, there's a way. You will always make it right in the end. But then you get into the industry, and then you realize, sometimes if something seems like a bad idea, it actually is a bad idea. And sometimes if you think something will fail, it's because it might actually will fail. And so it's good to have a sober analysis of things and say like, hey, is this actually a good project? Is this going to actually help our business bottom line? Is this a project that will actually help me in making progress in my career? And if the answer is no, there's a good chance that maybe you should be doing something else. So these are some pictures of my time at Google. Wide variety. Googlers were known for having fun, so they had like alligators, long story, that I was able to pose with, ball pits, things of that nature, free food, buses that would take you around to different places. It was a dog-friendly environment, and so you'd often see a lot of dogs there. In California, just in general, was a fairly beautiful place to be. All right, so to move a little bit more into my tech leading and intern experience. So roughly, I guess about in 2019, I had an opportunity to lead a team of folks. So I initially started off with maybe about 2 or 3 people, and then maybe about 3 or 4, and some additional folks ended up joining us from a remote office. So I wanted to kind of talk about some of the tips that I would have from this standpoint. So I think the first thing to note is that as you become a tech leader or manager, move up, coding becomes a much smaller piece. That you're looking much more to use and to be a thought leader in the technical judgment. And so you may be writing designs and saying like, hey, this component over here is going to relate to this component over here in a slightly different area, way or manner, or we need to make sure that we're properly communicating with these individual teams. And I liked what one manager said at Google at one point is you can almost consider, when you're writing designs, it's like you're coding, but you're just using these higher level constructs. So you're not necessarily coding as much individually per se, but you're still having that technical piece to your work. Secondly, have a heart for your people. because ultimately as a tech lead, you're not just trying to um, get a particular project done, but then you also have people as well that you're trying to make sure that they are individually happy, that they are growing in their skills. And so I would highly encourage, get to know the people that you're working with individually, spend a lot of time with them. And even though it's not technically in your job description as a tech lead, I would still encourage you to coach them for career-wise. Especially if there are cases where they're much newer in their career compared to you, that can be very helpful in kind of getting them bootstrapped. Um, you'll also have to navigate politics as well. And this will, you have to deal with this no matter what company that you're at. And so as your team, you'll need to set boundaries like, okay, this is what my team is going to work on. This is what your team is going to work on, making sure you have appropriate channels, etc. And I think this is where like really having a strong manager is good, because sometimes there may be cases where you might need your manager to go up to bat for you and to help kind of solve different problems that may arise. And so definitely make sure that you have a good relationship with your manager. It reminds me of what some people mentioned at one point, that oftentimes people don't leave bad teams or bad projects, they leave bad managers. And so I would definitely recommend, as you are choosing, what team you want to go to join, make sure that get to know your manager well and understand who he is, and make sure that you're really comfortable with that. And then lastly, keep going. You'll make mistakes. There'll be times where you feel like, I don't feel like a tech lead, but keep going. You'll grow into that role over time, even if you don't necessarily feel that way exactly up front. And then here's a couple more pictures. We had a lot of trips as well. So 2 pictures when I was over in Chicago. There's also, we had some Christmas parties as well. So the circus and the dolphins were examples of those. And so, yeah, it was definitely a fun time, just in general. And so I interned, had interns, total of 2 summers, and I did suite interns 1 year and then EP interns the next. And so these are kind of tips that I would give like as an intern host to you as a potential intern. So I'd say 1, make sure to track your work. So if you're writing change lists or make summaries of what you're doing, get statistics like lines of code, because ultimately your intern host is going to need to create a packet where they can say, hey, this person should be hired or not. And so the more work that you can do to summarize and kind of demonstrate, like make your own case for you, so to speak, and then give that to your intern host, then it becomes much easier for them, because then as they're making that, they can say, oh, okay, well, these are different things that so-and-so has done. The other thing I would say, explore the company. Definitely reach out to other engineers or even product managers or designers. Engineers are very happy to meet with you. And as a secret, people love talking about themselves. So if you ask people about their job and what they're doing, they're typically more than likely going to be willing to help you. And that can be useful for yourself so that you can help crystallize where you want to go with your career. And then also, don't be afraid to ask for help either. The corporate code is very complex. And so you definitely don't want to be in a mindset where you're kind of thinking to yourself like, hey, I have to prove that they made the right decision, otherwise they might just find me as a fraud. Take a deep breath. They knew what they were doing when they hired you as an intern. The corporate world can often be fairly complex to get bootstrapped. And so definitely feel empowered to ask questions so that you can move forward more quickly. And then also for market reviews, definitely make sure to have your host or others give you mock interviews, because you pretty much have at that point access to industry trained interviewers. So you can get industry trained interview experience in that sense. So definitely take advantage of that. Cool. So this brings me a little bit to my tech evangelism. I did a lot of campus recruiting. It was nice too, because I also got to travel. So I actually went to Toronto to do some campus recruiting at the University of Waterloo. We do a variety of activities while we were campus recruiting. The most typical would be career booths, career fairs. We also gave different talks, whether that be on what we're doing at work, diversity and inclusion, or design thinking, or even other like community building events. And we also like to eat too. It's nice to go out to different restaurants typically throughout our time there and get some good food. So I loved kind of this as an excellent way to give back. But then also just doing a lot of campus recruiting and things, they also have many other benefits as well. You know, you get to travel, see old friends at school, and they're an excellent way to practice your presentation skills, your mentorship, and your event planning. And all of those things you're going to need to use later, especially if you're tech leading or if you are managing. So I would definitely recommend using this, or even like hosting interns even as well is a good way to get practice in being a tech leader manager, or to try it out before having to deal with a larger group of people. All right, so this brings me to the last section. So last year, I wanted to move closer to home. As I mentioned before, I'm from Atlanta, Georgia. I have been at this point gone for about roughly 8 years between school and work. And also, Silicon Valley, while I enjoyed it, there was also parts I didn't like as much. It's very tech focused, which can be both a good and bad things. It's easy to be less balanced and just kind of absorb everything into work. Also being far from family as well, and it's very expensive in the Bay. So the likelihood of you actually being able to own a house, which is worth millions of dollars, is very difficult. And so it became a very transitory place where people would come and then they would go and come and go. So I decided I wanted to move back. So I started searching for tech companies in Atlanta and ultimately landed on Full Story. So as I mentioned earlier, Full Story is a digital experience company that's focused on providing session replay and other quantitative insights so that you can better improve your website. So right now I'm a senior software engineer on the insights team. So I'm focusing, I should say, on two main things primarily. So providing insights on your page, like for example, like how much users are scrolling, but then also we recently started up a program called Full Connections that's just focusing on diversity outreach at HBCUs. So this was the project my first project that I was working on there that I got a chance to build end to end. So this is just scroll map, so you can see like, okay, roughly how many users scroll down how far, and what's the median fold that you have for your individual websites. So I'll talk a little bit about the pros and cons kind of, of startups versus big companies, because I think that oftentimes, in tech, that can be something that you may wonder about a lot. So the pros of startup is that there are great opportunities for senior career growth. There's typically a lot more to do than the number of hands to do it. And it's a much more ambiguous space. And so it leaves more for you to leave your mark. Versus at a bigger company, it can be harder to climb the ladder just because there's more competition and you're kind of a smaller fish in a bigger pond. As startups, you have great ability to shape the culture. So like, for example, in the case of Full Story, we don't yet currently have an intern program or doing much by way of campus outreach. So I have an opportunity to help be involved in that space and shape it in a way that I couldn't at Google, just because, at Google, all of those things are, for the most part, pretty much set up and set in place. And typically at bigger companies, you'll have a harder time to influence culture since it's already set. You can influence it some at the micro level, like of your individual peers, but it's harder at the macro scale. Startups typically are more family friendly, or I guess feel more like a family, I should say. You can get to know people much more easily, know all the folks in the office, and interact with people who aren't just engineers. Bigger companies, you tend to have to deal with a little bit more politics as well. Startups typically have higher payout potential just because, if you get it, like if you're working at, next Google, Facebook, or what have you, and the stock explodes, obviously you'd be able to get more money in the long run. But, for bigger companies, the payoff is more steady, but it tends to be less explosive in general. And then also in startups, you're typically closer to the product. You're typically working directly with your customers and having an opportunity to sort of get feedback from them. Whereas bigger companies, you may be doing a little bit more on migration work and maintenance and kind of upkeep and things of that nature. All right, so to do the flip side of that, pros of big companies versus startups. So pros, big companies are typically great for a first job just because they're large enough that they can afford to train you as an engineer to know, okay, how do you actually do things up to industry standards? Versus in startups, it can be more difficult for entry level just because startups may typically hire for more experienced candidates just because there's a limited amount of resources. And so startups have to do more with less. Big companies tend to offer very premium benefits, whereas startups may offer slightly fewer. Obviously, you're still going to get paid very well, in the tech. But for example, a lot of big companies may offer annual bonuses at the end of the year, whereas startups may not do that as much just because they're short on cash. Big companies typically have access to more resources. So if you want to do more diversity work or just travel, that tends to be like available in abundance. Where startups, they may still have some of those things, but you tend to have fewer resources just because it is a tighter budget. Big companies tend to have well-defined processes and structures for how to do things, where again, in startups, there's great ambiguity. So there can be a lot of you trying to also build out some of those structures as well. And then lastly, with bigger companies, they tend to have more recognizable name brands. And so that can be useful, if you're putting on your resume and you can say like, hey, I worked at, Microsoft or Facebook or something like that. That can be helpful for you as you're trying to get future opportunities down the road. Whereas with startups, they're a little bit lesser known. Ooh. So that concludes my presentation. So as I mentioned earlier, I had hidden some spider webs throughout the presentation, and whoever ended up getting the correct count would win a prize. So now is the time and the moment for that. So with that, I'll say for folks in the chat, if you can go ahead and enter what you think the number may be. Okay, and let's see if I can try to see if I can close the chat real quick. Okay, so everybody ready for the count? The answer? And the answer is indeed 31. Okay, so TAMU, I think you were the first person to do that correctly. So I guess, James, would it be possible if you could connect me with TAMU so I can get the prize their way?
Yeah, absolutely. Like connect after this this Q&A wraps up.
Yeah, sounds good.
Sure, I'm happy to.
I'm also surprised. Yeah, there were a lot of correct answers to this one. So you all were paying very well attention to the slides. Okay, cool. All right, so with that, this brings us to Q&A. So this is your moment of opportunity. Ask me any question you want about any of the content that I covered.
Wow, William, thank you so much. I just want to say that was a really incredible presentation, super in-depth, and really enjoyed hearing sort of all the way back to your college experience. Getting that advice is very relevant to your internships and then straight into your career. So thank you for sharing that. And I would love to open it up for questions. If anyone has one right off the bat, they could just go ahead and raise their hand. If not, I will go ahead and ask the first question.
I can go if that's okay.
Yeah, of course.
Firstly, I just wanted to thank you for such an amazing presentation. Literally every slide was very relevant to what I've always wondered about as a CS student. And my question was about the connect between CS education and industry. What do you think? Do you think that how well you do in those CS courses early on in college is a good representation of how well you're going to do in industry? Because I've heard a lot of conflicting opinions. Some say that universities try to make introductory courses too hard to weed out students, and it's not a good representative on the other hand, like you, a lot of people say that fundamentals are the most important and you should know those. So what is the balance there?
Okay. Yeah, I guess a lot of it it depends on, I guess, the reasons behind, I guess, so to speak. Because I would say on the one hand, a lot of it kind of comes to like you knowing yourself and which you might like most. So to give an analogy on the other side, I don't like art as much. Like I initially was signed up for a drawing class, but I just didn't like it because I was like, okay, like tell me what to do and like what specifically I need to do to get an A versus kind of being more nebulous. And so obviously, like I could have put in some effort to make progress in that area. But ultimately, I don't think that was the best fit for me. I think technology, and then also kind of speaking and interacting with people, I think works a little bit better. So I think a part of it is kind of asking yourself, like, hey, is it a case like as I'm going through this, does it feel like maybe I'm not as passionate about this compared to something else? And if that's the case, then it might be like, hey, what may be ways I can maybe supplement computer science with something else? Maybe you might want to become like lean more into the management route where you maybe get to work with people more and you're being more of an advisor per se. On specifically like how well they're a predictor, I think it's hard to use one individual data point. Because I have a couple of friends, like one guy I know in a company right now who's like self-taught himself, and he just didn't do any of the introductory courses at all. But he's doing excellently and very very well now. And also, I think I guess the other point that kind of alluded to is industry work is slightly different than school work, just because you're solving unsolved problems in industry versus solved problems. And so there's slightly a different set of skills per se. So I think just because you're not good at algorithms doesn't necessarily mean you won't be good at building like a mobile app. But if the issue is more like, hey, I don't feel as much like I like engineering in and of itself, then that might be a question to say like, hey, maybe there might be ways I can supplement it. Did that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, it did. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Who wants to ask the next question? I have one, which is like you. I think making the decision to sort of move on from Google and try something new at a startup where things are a lot more flexible, right? And there's a lot more moving pieces. So it's someone at your level in your career. What kind of inspires that decision to make the career move?
Okay. So I will first say that I think this is something that, in retrospect, I might have done sooner. But I think during the time, I may have continued where I was going previously. So to elaborate about that, when I initially decided to move, it was primarily because I wanted to be closer to family. Because I had been out in California for about 4 years at that point, and Google didn't have an office in Atlanta. But at least at that point, I was thinking like, hey, I am kind of more or less happy where I am currently, and I can continue to make progress in that area. But then because of those, I guess, non-work factors, I was like, okay, well, let me start looking for companies in the Atlanta area that ends up deciding on Full Story. Now, I think on the flip side, I appreciate that move and transition even more, just because I think, especially with me being more personal, I think I like that smaller feel and feeling more of like a community as well. And the fact that, because, in general, like at least especially in search, where it can be very difficult for you to get a big meaty project where you're actually building out something new. And if you have like 5, 7, 8, 9, 10, how many people who are trying to get a similar project as well, you might just end up not getting it because of the fact that there's just so many people and so few opportunities. And so I think the fact that there are so many, I think helped a lot I think in many ways, I'm able to grow more quickly at a startup than I would have been able to at a larger company. And so I think those are things that I look back now and say like, yeah, I think that would influence my decision now. But really, it was just at the time more of a family thing. But I think the meta point that I would say is, I think especially in software engineering, we can have such a focus on career, that we can potentially just exclude everything else, and so realize that the career is one part. You know, you're not just your career. You also have family, you have friends, there are particular parts of the U.S. or cultures that you like, and so make sure that's just one part in a larger decision that you're making.
Yeah, no, that's super helpful to hear, kind of how you factored those different parts. And thank you, William. And I'll let Temu ask your question. Congratulations on the webs as well. 31 was right on the nose. And I just sent an email to connect you two.
Yay, thank you. First of all, it was really interesting. Also, it definitely kept me on my toes. I just wanted to know, like, two quick questions. One, when you were going out to campuses and talking to students, what were some of the most impactful things you felt like you said to them that helped them like succeed in whatever path they were looking forward to? And then two, as a TL, what was your most impactful project or something that you worked on?
Okay. So I think first, what was most useful, helpful for students? So I think it varies based on the students. So I think there were a lot of students that I ran across, I think especially earlier on, like freshman, sophomore year, it's kind of like, hey, I don't really know if I can do this because, I just started in CS, and then you have all these people who have seemed like they've been coding since they were in diapers, and I just don't really know if I'm able to compete as much. And so I think for a lot of those students, the biggest thing of just knowing like, hey, it's not the end of the world. You can do this, even though college and the transition from high school to college can be intense. You'll get through it. You'll be able to make progress. There are people here who can help you along the way. But not only that, but knowing that your goal ultimately isn't to try to become someone else, but to do the best that you can do. And so focus on what you can do one step at a time. And then, especially because the fact that now it's computer science, there are many, many opportunities. And so even if you don't necessarily get at a top company, you can still find a job there, and you can find a job that you enjoy. And so I think that piece of knowing, just like myself, in the sense of, I got into computer science fairly late, but that didn't mean that, I was completely shut out. Of students knowing that, yes, it's possible to succeed, but also impossible for me to succeed in CS, I think was one of the most impactful things. A lot of the other like specifics, I kind of covered throughout the individual slides. I guess one of the projects is tech leading. So at least the one that I like the most, and this is, I guess, is not really much of a project as much as, so during that time, I was working with one Xoogler who was an intern previously, and then she had come back to join us. So I was kind of her first tech lead, kind of helping her out, kind of get adjusted. And then I hosted 2 EP interns over the summer. And so I really enjoyed being able to kind of help break out chunks of work that they could work on, making sure that it was leveled such that they have one initial thing that gets to larger challenge and so on and so forth. Understanding what their own individual career goals were and helping to see what ways I could facilitate. And also just the general culture and dynamics were pretty fun. We did different events, like we visited different Google offices and things of that nature. So when I look back, I think that was like even though it's not as much technical, the fact that I was able to like work with those people was the thing that I enjoyed the most. Because I know, like, back when we would we'd have our one-on-ones and talk about stuff, I always ran late. But those were some of the most memorable times that I had.
Also, just a really quick follow-up, because I don't know what is an EP? I'm so sorry. I have no idea what that is.
But yeah, so EP, so it's rebranded a little bit. So EP and STEP is a Google internship that's geared primarily for freshmen and sophomores. So it's kind of a mix of a little bit of a developmental internship where they realize you don't necessarily have as much experience as you would if you were a junior about to graduate, or a junior moving on to senior about to graduate. So that's what the internship is. And it typically, so in a general suite internship, you just have one intern, versus for EP, they come in pairs, so you're working with two people.
Awesome. Thanks, William. I think we'll wrap up with Regina's question. And yeah, really appreciate you taking the time to answer these questions and for the great questions as well. Thank you.
Okay, hi, William. So thank you for the presentation. And then my question is just like, I know a lot of Xoogler students that are also incoming freshmen. So what would you think is the most effective way for us incoming freshmen on a gap year who are interested in CS to sort of learn the fundamentals and get beginner experience? Because I know there's like auditing online classes and also coding boot camp. So what do you think would be the most helpful?
Yeah, that's a good question. And so I guess so just to make sure I understand correctly. So you're taking a gap year so you finish high school, you're taking a gap year, and then you're going to start your first year of college after that?
Yeah.
Okay. That's a good question. So I would say, and I guess as another follow-up question to that, like how familiar are you with computer science currently? Like, did you take AP Computer Science?
No, I didn't take AP Computer Science in high school, but I'm currently auditing like beginning CS classes.
Okay. So I would say, I think for your case in particular, I think the biggest thing that you could do is just learn a little bit more like how to code, and kind of getting a feel for that. So whether that be auditing some intro classes, doing some of the intro assignments and things of that nature, I think those would be kind of the best way so that you could, because I think at that point, a lot of it is just a matter of like repetition. Like if you're painting or if you're learning how to sculpt, you just need to try that again and again so that you hammer down those skills. And so the more that you have to do concrete coding, the better. I would recommend the courses just because I think it's useful to have something that's structured that helps you to build upon things, such that you can go from one assignment to the next.
Right.
Unfortunately, I'm not quite as familiar with specifics courses that may be helpful, but that might be one potential thing where you could either like reach out to like the Xoogler School network itself, or even some alumni in your school and say like, hey, what have been useful things? I think the other thing I would say as well is, try to find some just side projects to work on that you think might be interesting and enjoyable to you. And so maybe one thing you might try to build your own website, or if you're like me and love video games, you could try to create a video game or something like that. Or even you could get a group of friends together and say like, hey, let's find some real world problem that we think we could solve in maybe like a month or two and build it out together, which would also be useful too, because then like from a resume standpoint, you could say, hey, this is some projects that I did. But overall, I would say the biggest thing is make sure to have a chance to focus on the fundamentals.
Got it. Okay, thank you. Yeah, that makes sense. Like keeping structure, I think, with classes is really helpful.
Awesome. William, would you mind answering one final question from a student?
I can stay for a long time. So if y'all have more questions, you can keep firing them.
Is there a way can students follow up with you on LinkedIn if they think of a question later on? Or
but yeah, LinkedIn
awesome.
Also, I have one last slide that has my email address on too, so you can either LinkedIn or own email. So I'd be happy to continue answering questions.
Perfect. Thank you. I think we'll wrap up this official Q&A with Kushi's question. Thank you so much, Kushi.
Hi, thank you for an awesome presentation. I have a question that I think you touched on a little bit previously when you were talking about resumes and things like that. But what I want to know is what your approach to standing out is, while you work or while you're going for a role or while you're going for an additional opportunity at work. Do you focus on being the best coder in the room? Do you focus on building relationships with mentors and people in different positions, or with your peers? Like, what is your approach in doing the best job you can and getting, selected for those kinds of opportunities?
Yeah, so I would say the biggest thing is probably like whatever I'm doing, just trying to do it to the best of my abilities. It was interesting because I remember someone was mentioning a quote about Albert Einstein when he was saying he made a quote where it's like, people think, that I'm so smart for coming up with a lot of these inventions. But really it's just that I stay with problems longer than most people. And so, there's a degree work-wise of, just the individual aptitude, but then there's also like, hey, are we going to be persistent? Are we really going to dig in, even if it seems like, the problem is insurmountable? Are we still willing to ride it out to the end versus kind of giving up and saying, oh, I can't do that? Now, that doesn't mean that sometimes if you're heading down a road, you don't need to like take a bird's eye view and then try to redirect yourself, but that you're still kind of making progress in that sense. And so I guess one of the things that I remember my manager was talking to me at one point when she was mentioning, she was just describing my work. She was saying like, I know that you do it at a consistent level of quality. And so there's a degree to which, I can depend upon you. And I think that's the biggest thing, that you want to kind of become dependable at whatever you're doing. Because the industry changes very rapidly. So one of the things I didn't mention earlier, so when my first year out of college, I think I had like 3 canceled projects where, I was working on something. I was like, oh yeah, this is going to succeed. And then it ended up not. Then we worked on something else and then it continued on like that, which produced the Analyze Soberly section. But as a result of that, it's like one day you may think this is going well and then something changes and you don't. Or even things could change, in the world as well, in the sense of things that maybe weren't a focus previously are now a focus. And so sometimes the opportunities that you have, you can't really predict them, so to speak, but it's more just a matter of, hey, I know the types of things that I'm interested in. So I'm kind of gravitating, like I like back end, I like diversity related things. So I gravitate toward those spaces. And then when problems come up, it's much easier for you to know about them, but then also 2, for you to get an opportunity to go at them. And if you're known in general as being someone who's dependable, then they can say like, well, hey, although you may have never done this before, given the fact that I know that you'll do well in it, you can learn what you need to learn.
Yeah, thank you. That was really helpful.
No problem.
Well, awesome. I think that is going to bring us to the close of this awesome presentation. As you can see, William's put up his email for further questions. Can't thank you enough and can't tell you how awesome this presentation was. It was really engaging. I think everyone was really sharply paying attention and definitely learning about you, but also about ways that we can sort of take advantage of our college experience and be sort of prepared and best practices for moving into our professional lives. So yeah, can't thank you enough for spending the time creating this presentation, being here. And I think that'll wrap things up. And to anyone who's tuning in on the YouTube with us, we have another event. It's a Q&A with Kat Manulak from Y Combinator on Friday. And that will be streamed as well at 2 p.m. Pacific. So we hope to see you for that session. Are there any final parting words you'd like to share there, William?
But first, thank you all for having me. It's definitely been an honor and a joy for myself. It's always a delight when I can chat a little bit more, and especially talking to students. But yeah, it's just my parting word would just be definitely remain encouraged. I was reading a book and it's mentioning, in general, one misbelief that we can oftentimes kind of suffer from is thinking that, everything in life is supposed to go perfectly well, and that when we meet an obstacle, we kind of see that as an anomaly or bad thing. But, throughout life, you have different obstacles or challenges to overcome. And so don't let the fact that there's an obstacle there necessarily discourage you. Continue to press on, continue to be perseverant, and know that in time, you'll be able to gain proficiency. And just as much as you can look back like over your high school careers and say like, hey, when I came out as a freshman, there was a lot of things I didn't know, but by the time I was a senior, I had mastered a lot of things. Know that the same thing will happen through college and then through also your career. We may be talking about a larger time frame. So maybe we're talking, especially in the industry, maybe 5 years, 10 years, etc. But know that in time, your work will pay off. So definitely continue to be encouraged and continue to press on.
Great. Let's have everyone send off William with a Zoom react or something. Really appreciate this. I'll give you the heart of approval. So yeah, thanks so much. And I hope you have a great rest of your Wednesday, everyone. Make sure to follow us on the YouTube and keep up to date with the rest of these events.
Okay, take care, everybody.
Goodbye.
Thank you, William. Bye.